Today's headline is Favorite Old Songs. The subheadline says, Old Melodies and Their Pleasant Associations. Whence came the old oaken bucket and life on the ocean wave? This article was originally reported by the New York Times. It says, in a small and old-fashioned but cozy chop house, way downtown, two veritable bohemians sat the other afternoon, and even their pipes and ale exchanged recollections. Their talk after a while touched upon old familiar songs, many of which possess peculiarly interesting local associations. Now there's the old oaken bucket, said one of the bohemians. That song had its birth up here in Duane Street in 1817. Samuel Woodworth, a gifted but erratic printer, was living there at the time. One hot summer's day, he went into his house and drank a glass of water, remarking, "That tastes good, but how I wish that I could drink just at this minute from the old oaken bucket on my father's farm." Woodworth's wife remarked sympathetically, "What a poem could be written on that thought." The printer pondered for a minute, and sitting down at the nearest table began to write. Soon the touching verses, beginning, "How dear to this heart are the scenes of my childhood," were written. Soon afterward, the words were coupled with a melody composed by Keelmark for Araby's daughter, and were sung far and wide. "Woodman, Spare That Tree" is another famous song based on a local incident, said the second bohemian. The words were written by George P. Morris, who lived in New York almost all his life and died here in 1864. When he was a boy, his home was on a farm not far from Bloomingdale. He was wont to play there under an old tree planted by his grandfather. Many years after, he had left the farm, and the property had passed out of the hands of his family. He happened in that neighborhood one day and saw a man about to cut down the old familiar tree. He begged the man to desist, and received the gruff response that the tree would bring $10 for firewood. He gave the man the money and took a bond for the safe protection of the tree. Soon afterward, he wrote the noted song, which was set to music by Henry Russell. "You have heard how a life on the ocean wave came to be written, I suppose?" queried the first speaker as he moistened his lips from his ale mug. "No? Well, it was this way. Epps Sargent was walking along the edge of the battery one bright morning, when the numerous craft, dancing on the glistening water, brought to his mind a suggestion made to him some time before by his friend Henry Russell, that he write a marine song. He wrote the words of A Life on the Ocean Wave, and showed them to George P. Morris, who remarked that they made a nice little poem, but they wouldn't do for a song. Soon afterward, Russell met Sargent and asked him for the verses. Taking them to a music store at Broadway and Park Place, Russell went into a little back room, seated himself at a piano, and in a few minutes composed the air of that famous song. Sargent never received a cent for it, although the sales of the song were large. Ben Bolt, you remember, was a noted song along about 1850, continued the first bohemian. The original words of that song were written in 1842 by Dr. Thomas Dunn English of Philadelphia while on a visit to New York, and sent as a gratuitous contribution to a magazine edited by his friend N.P. Willis. Some years afterward, the verses were repeated from memory to Nelson Nass, a New York bohemian, who set them to music, adapting an old German song. The instantaneous success of Ben Bolt made it a source of great profit to its publishers, but Nass died in poverty, complaining that he only received a trifle for his work. So far as is known, the writer of the original verses got nothing. But few writers of popular songs ever made any money out of them, or accurately remarked the second bohemian. There's the familiar case of John Howard Payne, a New York boy who wrote Home Sweet Home while starving in an attic in Paris. The song was to be sung in his opera, Clary, the Maid of Milan. Payne never got anything for it, and later in his life he wrote to a friend in this city, "How often have I been in the heart of Paris, Berlin, London, or some other city, and have heard persons singing or hand organs playing Home Sweet Home, without having a shilling to buy myself the next meal or a place to lay my head." True, Payne's case was a pathetic one, assented Bohemian number 1, motioning the bartender to again fill the mugs. But there have been instances where songwriters made a great deal of money and did not know how to keep it. Take the experience of Stephen Collins Foster, for example. He produced Old Kentucky Home, Old Dog Tray, Old Folks at Home, Old Uncle Ned, and scores of other popular songs for which he received large sums of money. It is a matter of record that more than 125,000 copies of Old Dog Tray were sold in 18 months. Foster was a reckless, happy-go-lucky fellow. Some of his most famous songs were written on brown wrapping paper in the back part of a downtown grocery store in the city. He was taken sick here and was conveyed to a hospital where he died penniless January 18, 1864. Another man who received large sums of money for his songs was Henry C. Work of this city, the author of Wake Nicodemus, Marching Through Georgia, and Grandfather's Clock. The sales of the last mentioned song were enormous, and Work received $5,000 in royalties on that alone. There are some songwriters who not only never received any money for their work, but in subsequent years had to fight for the credit of authorship. Such was the case with the author of Rock Me to Sleep Mother, who was Mrs. Elizabeth Akers Allen, wife of Paul Akers, the sculptor, and afterward the wife of E.M. Allen of this city. She wrote the song while in Italy and sent it to Philadelphia where it was published. There was a widely discussed dispute over the authorship of that song. Well, I guess there's never been any dispute about the origin of Hail Columbia, said Bohemian No. 2, somewhat irreverently. The words of that stirring song were written by Joseph Hopkinson of Philadelphia in 1798, when war with France was thought to be imminent. The music to which the words were subsequently set was originally written as General Washington's March by a German named Fales, the leader of the orchestra in the old John Street Theater in this city. Mr. Custis, Washington's stepson, is the authority for that statement. Well, let us drink up and move along, said Bohemian No. 1, lifting his foam-flecked mug for a final draught. By the way, you remember that famous drinking song, Sparkling and Bright, which was written by Charles Fenno Hoffman. Poor fellow, although a cripple from boyhood, he was always genial and convivial. He had one of his legs crushed by a ferry boat at Cortlandt Street when he was but 11 years old. In spite of his deformity, he graduated from Columbia College with honors and practiced law with a fair degree of success. He died in a hospital. This story came from the great state of Massachusetts, being reported in the Boston Weekly Globe of September 6, 1890. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.